and let us know after the meeting. Please, could you all stay on mute while the conversations are happening? I'm sure you all appreciate you've spoken before and it's quite distracting to hear some playback, etc. So please do bear that in mind. The reports are being launched as we speak. So our comms lead, Lauren, is with us today, and we'll drop the links to those to our website in the chat for you all to read at your own time after the meeting. And then finally, if there's anybody who wants to know more about the work of this specific project or wider around our TrACE Toolkit work, we do have a national community practice which is open for anybody who's interested in the process to join and kind of gather some learning from a wide range and diverse range of organisations taking this forward at the moment. We do have a space for questions at the end, but knowing how these things run in terms of if we do overrun, please feel free to pop any questions as we're going through in the chat, and we will make sure that we capture all of those. And maybe that we'll have time to go through them all, but we will make sure that we share the questions directly with those who you're asking them of following the meeting and provide that in a summary back to you at the end, if that's okay. So I can see that the recording has started, and I've been through all of the housekeeping. So I'm just going to, sorry, get rid of that. Just going to do a bit of a context setting, really. My role here, as I said, is to introduce this work and then hand over to those who've been involved in the TrACE project with the substance misuse sector and this evaluation report. But we are thrilled to see so many people interested in this work, and that's been a key thread throughout everything that we've done with the substance misuse sector with relation to trauma-informed practice. We've been working with the sector for some time now, which started with co-producing a training package, which was offered out as a trainer-trainer model to the sector, and something that we've continued to build on then with this TrACE-specific work with continued support from substance misuse policy in Welsh Government team. So we are thrilled, as I said, to have people with us who've been on the journey with us. We know a lot of hard work has gone into this work with not just organisations, but from area planning boards. And we'd like to particularly thank Adferiad, who will be with us later, Naomi Oakley, who will be updating on their journey. Barod, who we have Rachel Wilson joining us, who should be with us now as first up. And then we also have Yori Harding and Neville Brooks from Powys, who've also been a massive supporter to this work as well. So a big thank you from ACE Hub, and I know Emma's going to speak with us later, but a big thank you from me to Emma for also leading this work and doing a grand job, which is something that's come out really strongly through this evaluation. So without further ado, I'm going to hand you over to Michael Curtis, who's going to just give his contribution to today, who's been a real keen supporter of this work and has continued to fund not just the work that we did last year, but contribute to the ongoing sustainability of this work as well. So over to you, Michael.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Good afternoon, everyone. It's really good to be here today to see the launch of this report. I have had a chance to look through it. I think it's a really useful and helpful report, as is often the case, and I hope there's no huge surprises in there, but I think what it's really useful from is that it sets some context and it gives us a little bit of food for thought around some of the challenges that this process does entail. I think it would be fair to say when we started out on this journey, we always knew that it was going to be a challenge. This isn't something that's a quick win. I think perhaps what's really come out from the report is that... Is that better sound? Somebody said they can't hear properly. Yeah, so what... Yeah, good. So what has really come out from the report, I think, is that it's probably going to take a bit longer than any of us thought, really. I think the one thing that we really need to is to acknowledge that we understand that and encourage people to come on the journey. It is worrying when you do read some areas where some organisations were concerned about the capacity, the time involved, etc., and the outcomes. Sounds like somebody's got their baby with us as well, but that's fine. The joys of home working and childcare. I think it is really important to acknowledge that we do understand that actually that this can never sit with any specific organisation. It is about the system as much as any organisation. So I really want to thank those organisations who, in spite of those concerns, have really engaged in this process and have been supporting it, because the learning from this is really helpful. I think one of the things that is always important around this as well is to say that this is about supporting high quality services that deliver good outcomes for service users. And there has to be somewhere in a reflection in that around, whilst we would always ask for more money and funding, there's also, we've got to be doing well with the funding that we've got. So that's not to excuse the funding issue, but I think is real important lesson here around that ever sort of present conundrum between quantity and quality. And I think we do need to really look at that. That is partly why we've commissioned the National Collaborative Units to do a demand and capacity survey of substance misuse sector, because we always know, and I think we'll always have to acknowledge that within this sector, there's always going to be more that we want to do and more that needs to be done. I think it is really important, though, that we continue to work across the whole sector. I was really glad to see the comments around bringing the NHS on board, which is why we and the ACES Hub are working really closely with Traumatic Stress Wales, who are slightly more involved in that clinical side of things, but that we can't look at the two issues separately. And there's actually been a lot of progress made in terms of bringing the ACES Hub and Traumatic Stress Wales together as well, to offer a sort of combined training and understanding of what we're trying to achieve in this field. Clearly area planning boards and Welsh Government are going to have a really important factor in providing leadership for this. Both the substance misuse and the mental health delivery plans are up for revision, and we will be looking really carefully at how we incorporate trauma-informed practice into those plans, and be really clear that this is a process, not something that is just going to happen overnight, or because we say you must commission trauma-informed services. It won't happen like that. I think looking at the outcomes, it was really positive to see that people felt that actually one of the things that the TrACE Toolkit had done is to pull together different sectors to think about how they work together. It's not just about the substance misuse field. Clearly, housing and homelessness are a really important area for us. Working with our criminal justice colleagues here in Wales is a really important area as well. So I think we do recognise that this is going to take some time, but it is really important to be really clear. We have started this journey, and it's one that we want to continue supporting and moving forward with. So I'm looking forward to hearing the experiences of the organisations. I think it was really interesting as well to read in the report that some of the organisations are, including third sector organisations, are large bodies that work in different areas and may have different challenges in those different areas, which is perhaps something that we hadn't thought through enough as well, in terms of thinking around how do we support those organisations. So I think there will be a lot of learning to come out of this. The report, I think, is really helpful in setting the context of what's happened so far. And I really look forward to, I'm hoping to stay for most of this afternoon's event, but really looking to hear from everybody on the front line what their experiences are, to hopefully get a better understanding. That's all from me, Natalie. I hope that was what you were expecting.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael. It's really important to, as you said, hear from those who've worked through this with us over the last 12 to 18 months. So I know you're really pressed for time, Rachel, so I'm going to ask you to come in now, if that's okay, and share Barod's journey with working with the TrACE Toolkit, if that's okay. Are you sharing some slides, or are you?
I will be, Natalie.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. My name is Rachel Wilson. I'm Resilient Families Manager for Barod, and I've been sort of co-leading our TrACE project across the organisation with my colleague Sarah Walsh, who unfortunately can't be here today. I have a short presentation mainly because it's a lot easier for me when I've got prompts to know what I'm talking about. Otherwise, I do tend to go off on a bit of a tangent because I like to talk. Can you all see that? I can't see you, so someone's going to have to shout.
Yeah.
Okay, so Barod's journey so far, having said that, it's been quite a short one. We're in the embryonic stage of our journey. However, some of it does predate to quite a long time ago. So initially what happened was that Choices West, which is the project that I lead, and Gwent Engage, which is the project my colleague Sarah leads, we attended developmental trauma and adverse childhood experiences, repairing the damage training. And from that, the young person services managers, we held follow-up discussions on how to embed that learning within our teams. From that, we developed a small group to look at an ACEs monitoring tool to be part of our assessment process within the project. We formed a task and finish group with representation from all of the young person services across Barod, and that would include Swansea, Cwmtaf, Bridgend, and Dyfed. And we developed this ACEs monitoring tool and guidance document as part of our assessment process, if you like, and we piloted it in each of the services. However, after about a 4 or 5 month pilot, it was deemed that it was not actually fit for purpose. And although that may seem a bit of a setback, we didn't sort of accept it as a setback. We saw it as just another piece of work that we tried, it didn't work, and these are the reasons why. And the reasons why were actually quite interesting. So as you can see there, we've got some feedback from our staff who piloted it. And the top one particularly interesting, that they've been using the tool alongside Swansea Barod initial assessment documents for a period of 4 months. During the time, they struggled to identify the value of its completion added to their own practice as a frontline caseworker. Not because young people are not impacted by ACEs, but rather that our existing assessment captures what may be deemed adverse childhood experiences already as part of that initial and risk assessment documents. So we were already incorporating it and having that professional curiosity, as we keep going back to, it's our buzzword at the minute, to look at it anyway. The ACEs tool was helpful, that it had a box to record any action. However, it did merely duplicate what was already in our existing care plans. So we were already touching on some of the work, we just didn't need that additional tool to record it. So that was a really good sort of starting point for us. What happened next was, I mean, we could have left it there and said, well, that's it. But what happened next was almost that the stars aligned, if you like, because Emma, who was actually the team leader within my team in Choices West, got us secondment into the ACEs hub. So the stars were aligned that we should carry on this work, really. And, you know, through Emma's support, we began to explore the self-assessment tool within the young person services. Both Choices West and Engage started doing it separately as separate pieces of work. But as we began, we really recognised quite quickly that the tool was bigger than just 2 small projects within Barod, and we needed a whole organisational approach to that. So we developed a TrACE steering group and developed our draft, or started to develop our draft action plan. So in the steering group, we've got representation from all of the services across Barod, from adult services and young person services, and also the central services, which include recruitment, workforce development, estates, HR. They're all involved and have representation on that steering group. We began with online meetings. We had 2 of those, and we've moved to our first face-to-face meeting. So when I say it's embryonic, we've only just had our 3rd meeting. The 3rd meeting took the form of a development session with Emma, who came along as well, who was able to give us a really good, thorough overview of the work of the ACEs Hub and provide context for the group, bearing in mind that some of those people had not been involved in the original reason why the group was there in the first place. So as part of that development day, we did some group exercises particularly looking at what does TrACE practice mean to you, and evidence gathering for the areas of focus in the action plan. And then we set the agenda for some future meetings. So when we split our group into smaller groups, little subgroups, and asked what does trauma and ACE-informed practice mean to you, the things they came up with were flexibility, needs-led, inclusivity, that professional curiosity, that ability to ask pertinent, relevant questions where safe and necessary to do so, and also influenced by organisational culture, which was quite important that we have that culture running right through. The steering group agenda is going to be set. It consists of introductions. It's about setting the scene and the context of the task for the group each time. Minutes and actions are always taken and looked back on from the previous meeting. We look at service updates, so how each project within Barod is progressing with their actions. We look to complete or to fulfill or to update on the action plan, and we always agree the next meeting in advance. Currently, we're meeting again in August, so there's a big enough gap to give us enough time to work on any actions that have been set or delegated to participants. So the 5 principles of trauma-informed Wales document, where we have no harm, person-centred, relationship-focused, inclusivity, resilience and strengths-focused, all came part of our, the collaboration, the language we're going to be using. TrACE-informed practice is going to be for everybody, and looking at those 5 principles as we work through our action plan. During the steering group, we looked at 6 domains. Well, we actually looked at 5 domains in the steering group because we didn't have time to move on to the biggest one of all, the monitoring and evaluation. But we started to look at the governance, leadership and organisational culture. We started to look at policies and procedures, our workforce training and support programme. We looked at our physical environment, and we had a discussion about service delivery and design as well. And the actions that came out of that were that the steering group and communication forum would be Teams channel. We've set up a Teams channel where any new documents, any discussion points can be had, any support can be given through Teams as we progress. We ensured the understanding of the context of the group with all our members and communicated to all Barod staff about the group's existence, with an extended invitation for anyone to join. And Anne will be delighted to hear you've got 3 new recruits joining as well, who said, yeah, I'm really interested in that. And we update about the group and the plan in our weekly staff briefing as well. TrACE has been added to all the agendas for different projects, team meetings, and it's also something that we will be discussing in our equality, diversity and inclusion group as well, because we feel that it does link very closely with the work that they're currently doing in reviewing recruitment and how we advertise and how the language around those advertisements and the whole interview process looks, particularly taking into account some neurodivergence issues as well. Sarah actually is going to be meeting with our GDAS colleagues to discuss shared best practice, because they're already on this journey, and we'll be inviting them to join some of our task and finish groups to link in with the good practice that they've developed as well. And obviously the ACEs monitoring tool project completed. So our priority actions moving forward is that we're going to be working on a statement of commitment or pledge via the task and finish group led by the ACEs Hub that both myself and Sarah attend. Policy guidance document will be shared with the group for review, and we'll be developing a specific policy review action plan from that. We're looking at developing a building spaces audit tool to be piloted with young person services and hopefully within our new building income tax. That will be linked to the physical spaces task and finish group, which again is led by the ACEs Hub, and Sarah and I attend that too. Baseline data on staff's understanding of TrACE-informed practice is to be gathered at the Barrod's Development Day in September. And as I said, the recruitment review is currently being undertaken to ensure that TrACE-informed practice is prioritised. And finally, training, which will be an e-learning for all staff. It will be part of everybody's induction, but everybody will be asked to do it as a one-off for existing members of staff. That will be looking to be rolled out from September after our all staff development day. And we'll be looking and exploring opportunities for more comprehensive training to follow on from that, such as PI, psychologically informed training, and also some of the vicarious trauma as well. And that is it. That's only as far as we've got. And actually, you know, I say only, it's it's quite a lot for just 3 meetings. We've actually achieved an awful amount of work, and we're on this journey now, and we're really enthusiastic, and we've got a great team on the steering group who are really proactive as well. So unfortunately, I do have to dip out, but any questions can be diverted to Emma, because she's been part of this process with us and has been helping us all the way through. So big thanks to Emma as well. And thank you everybody for listening.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, please feel free to leave when you need to. But just a thank you from me as well for sharing your journey. And like you said, you've done an incredible amount of work, which at times doesn't feel like you've made much movement. But when you reflect, you actually have. But I think it's really important that you outlined, you know, your kind of 5-month pilot, and that wasn't really a setback, but it is about that flexibility of trialing something, recognizing it's not having the impact you wanted or initiated, and changing your practice to accommodate. So thanks for sharing that, because I think it's really important that there is no one way to do this, and it really is a journey, not a destination. Unfortunately, it's always going to be that ongoing reflection. And just to pick up, some of the tools you referenced in the work that you're doing are related to our work with the National Community of Practice, which I spoke about at the beginning, which we'll pop a contact for in the chat if anybody would like to come on board, share the experience. But also we do have those task and finish groups, which are constantly looking for ways which we can co-produce additional tools to really help this journey as well. So a big thank you from the ASUB, Rachel, for sharing your journey today and the ongoing commitment. And you have really done and achieved a lot in three meetings. So thank you very much. And as you said, we'll collect the questions in the chat, unless we are a couple of minutes ahead of schedule. So if anybody does have any burning questions before Rachel shoots off or while Emma's here, please feel free to raise your hands, and we'll try to do them. Nope. Brilliant. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. And we'll speak soon. Next on our agenda, we're going to hear from Llŷr Roberts, who is from BlwBo, who are the independent consulting organisation who've been leading on the evaluation that we're all here to hear about today. Yeah, over to you, Llŷr, if that's okay.
Thank you very much, Natalie. Can I share my screen first of all?
Yeah, that's up and showing.
Fantastic. Thank you. Well, thank you for the invite. It's a pleasure to be here. Unfortunately, my colleague Mark, who's been working hard on this evaluation alongside me, can't join us today, but obviously a pleasure to kind of surmise the process that we've been through over the last few months, and obviously highlight a few findings maybe for you to structure conversations around later on. Just some context, first of all, we were commissioned back in August 2022 to independently evaluate a pilot of the TrACE Toolkit with the substance misuse sector in Wales. And I remember when we got involved, we had conversations with Natalie and Emma around the purpose of our role. We were trying to work out whether there was a focus on undertaking a process evaluation, or whether this should have more of a focus on the kind of the outcomes and the impact. Obviously, starting a new venture or project like this is an opportunity to reflect on those success indicators or the outcomes and impact indicators that you would expect to see from such a project. But we learned pretty quickly that the focus should lie on the process side. So, you know, the evaluation team applied a formative approach to the evaluation exercise. And the idea here was to track implementation and offer feedback to the project team on progress, challenges, and broader emerging themes. So obviously, whilst we're at the end of the evaluation here, we're obviously sharing the report with you and a summary as a few summary slides. It's important to note, I suppose, that our role as part of this process was to bring information back to Emma, Natalie and the team, and I suppose just make them think about some key stages and how to shape the project moving forward. Now, as part of the evaluation brief, we zoomed in on 4 of these key themes, 6 of these key themes. So implementation arrangements for the pilot process. We looked at levels of engagement and interaction. We looked at progress made against key achievements, against the original outcomes as well. And obviously, we focused on things like barriers to progress. It was key for us, obviously, to just take an opportunity to reflect on the lessons before suggesting the next steps. And I suppose that's what we're trying to do here. And as you've come to an end of a key phase here as a project, I think it's probably timely just to reflect on the original 6 outcomes. I've tried to highlight these in the form of a bullet point, so they feature slightly differently here to what you had in your project proposal or what's in the actual evaluation report. But 6 in total, 3 on this slide. So the first one was to develop ACE's knowledge and skills, help organisations to adopt a whole service approach, take a universal approach to well-being and building resilience. And obviously, as you work through these, then it was about embedding ACE/stroke trauma-informed practice, and it was about creating a clear shared understanding of what a trauma-informed substance misuse organisation looks like. I think, you know, we've touched on some of the themes already, but it's actually quite interesting just to almost measure or see where you are against these outcomes now. But obviously, ask ourselves, I suppose, as we enter into the new phase, to see whether these should remain the same, or whether there's an opportunity maybe to look at some of these outcomes again, and reflect on where we are as a project. So outcome 4, obviously focus on supporting the well-being of staff. We talk about the provision of training and additional support, and recognising the widespread prevalence of trauma and that working with vulnerable people can be emotionally demanding. Whereas outcome 5 was more about development of understanding of what additional support and training staff across the sector might need. And 6 was more about enabling workforce to connect with other trauma-informed sectors to support the development of a whole system approach. And I think that's what we've seen with this, is that comprehensive whole system approach, the focus on not dealing with things in pockets, but obviously dealing with huge wider issues as a sector. And I think that's pretty key when looking at what's been achieved here, and obviously thinking about what you're hoping to achieve in the future. And as we reflected on some of the conversations, you know, we asked questions during various ERG meetings, community of practice meetings. We asked questions around the success indicators. We tested some of those indicators, and this is some of the feedback that we received from different individuals. You know, just read a few of these out for you. For example, getting trauma-informed practice on the agenda of substance misuse services would be a solid start. For them to be reflecting on this would be a success. Our light services, making sure that we are delivering training and support that is well aligned to other related sectors, so homelessness, criminal justice, etc. And then another comment here, if we can get a strong group together that champions this work, that will create a powerful movement for change. So I think, you know, we've seen through the evaluation a big focus on what you're trying to achieve with the actual toolkit itself, but we've also seen the efforts that you are trying, well, the efforts and the contribution that you're making as a movement, I suppose, to try and shift something quite big here. And I think this is just shows some of the feedback received on the success indicators, if you like, and what you're trying to achieve as a group. I'll just work through some of the headline findings before we come on and give you a flavour of the conclusions and recommendations. You know, we know that the pilot has been a short period of time, and we also know that, you know, there has been significant change within this period, and an opportunity, obviously, to reflect on the intervention and to identify what works well and what could be improved. And overall, it's been well received by stakeholders. We also know there's a modest but valuable engagement with the toolkit. Whilst you're still obviously trying to engage and encourage people to use the toolkit, and that will build over a period of time. The interaction that you've had to date has generated important learnings, and I think that's important, especially when running a pilot, because you can now obviously think about what's needed moving forward. But crucially, I think there's been a broader networking and collaboration activity. And as I mentioned earlier, you're trying to build momentum around these efforts. And we're on the call today talking about this specific topic, which is great to see. You know, it's strategic, it's aligned, and that was a real positive finding during the evaluation process. Mentioned earlier around the importance of learning and how it's informing revisions to the toolkit and associated guidance. Training provision has been really positive when having conversations with individuals involved with the toolkit. We've looked at the pros and cons. There's a number of success factors and barriers to highlight. I mentioned earlier, obviously, the importance of the strategic buy-in, how the whole organisation approach is key to this. It's not happening in pockets of the organisation. I suppose the challenge now is to ensure that it's not just one or two individuals engaging with a toolkit, but it's something that's embedded, and you see more of that whole organisation approach. And it's a dedicated resource as well. And we've seen a patient and gradual approach to this whole process, supported by the HACE Hub. And I think that's one of the other positives that's come out of this, is the need, obviously, for someone like Emma, Substance Misuse Lead, to support this activity. And during the evaluation, we had conversations with individuals involved at different levels to try and understand how Emma, for example, and others can add even more value moving forward. I think at first we saw this as an opportunity where through guidance and expertise, you can lead organizations and obviously move them to a kind of a key area of work. But we've since realized that there's more hand-holding needed here, more support needed, more practical support and more strategic support as well, in order to really develop this area of work moving forward. Obviously, you'll all be aware, I think we've touched on it already, there are a number of barriers when trying to change something like this and to implement something like this. Time is an issue, capacity is an issue. We had conversations with organizations who really saw the importance of the toolkit but struggled to get to it because of capacity and time issues. We also understand the importance of being clear in the approach and ensure that the concept is properly grasped by individuals and organizations. So there's ways and means of introducing key messages, and I think that was another thing that came out of the evaluation. I think the pilot was clearly geared towards delivering positive changes to culture and practice over time. We have seen a number of positive contribution towards the headline outcomes, and a range of benefits have come out of this. But obviously we know it takes time. There's a lot more work to do, but I think the key message with this slide is the dial has been moved, and the decision to extend Emma's role, I suppose, should support further progress. But there's probably conversations then to be had in terms of, how Emma and the team can support the organisation. So what is the role from a strategic point of view, what's needed from a practical point of view. And I suppose this is just highlighting the fact that, what we're seeing here is the end of the first stage, the kind of the pilot phase, but there's still an opportunity to shape and to move this moving forward. And I think that's quite important. In terms of the conclusions and recommendations, I won't go through all of these points, but we've highlighted some key themes in our report. One of those themes is how to promote and refine the approach. So it's obviously important that you continue to promote the TrACE Toolkit and resource appropriate support across the sector in Wales. We need to refine the TrACE Toolkit resource over time as practice evolves. We've touched upon it already, of course. Some organisations are undertaking certain pieces of work. This could tie into that work, of course. This could be a standalone piece. There's always an opportunity to reflect on this. We need to ensure that training provision is up to date as well, fit for purpose and well coordinated. And I think the organisations involved can really shape that. I remember having conversations with individuals, for example, who saw the toolkit and saw an opportunity in a way to maybe have training around certain aspects of that toolkit. So realising that the information that they received and the way of working was quite flexible, but they also wanted some guidance or things that would push them to look at certain aspects of the toolkit so that they would continuously push forward and deliver the toolkit as well. So some considerations there when it comes to training. Another theme was around reassurance and support. It's important that we manage expectations and provide clear messaging on what is expected of organisations that chose to engage with the toolkit. And where appropriate, it should also be made clear that the work requires resource and commitment, as well as buy-in at a whole organisation level. So, as I mentioned previously, this is not just a case of picking up a toolkit and thinking, let's do it, let's tick this box. It's more than that. This is hopefully leading to cultural change, changing the way in which organisations are delivering support as well to service users. And I think there's an opportunity to enhance the guidance available to organisations as they go through the process, specifically offering examples, ideas and case studies. You may decide, for example, that jumping on calls like this would help. Video updates, for example, might help. So that's something to consider moving forward. And I think to continue to stress the importance of the readiness checklist and self-reflection tool is also important. And then a couple of points around engagement and collaboration. Important that we build on the success of the engagement activity and structures established through the pilot. It's obviously an approach that's seen to align well with the principles and practice of co-production. And we need to continue the dialogue with the APBs and other service commissions to look at how we can gradually embed and ensure that this is even more embedded. And obviously, we heard earlier around the emphasis on bringing the NHS on board, for example. So a number of points there as well. And I think this is the final slide, leadership coordination. We need to encourage strategic stakeholders such as Welsh Government to provide leadership and clarity around the direction of travel. I think we're seeing that. Obviously, we're seeing an extension here, which is fantastic. And we can reflect on how the different parts of the trauma landscape in Wales fit together as well. And maybe think about the role of the sector, the landscape in coordinating, in co-producing something. And obviously I've touched on the potential role for the NHS there moving forward. And the final point, continue to place emphasis on a whole system and organisational approach to trauma-informed practice. Obviously that is important. So the focus is not just on the toolkit, it's the way of working, it's the culture and what we're trying to achieve. Again, all linking back to the original outcomes. And I think now is probably a good point for us to maybe reflect on those outcomes as we plan for the next phase of delivery. And the final point then, celebrate success. It's obviously important that once we achieve what we've set out to achieve, that we kind of celebrate that. And I'm not saying that developing some sort of a quality mark is the best way of doing that. Maybe there's a more of an informal way of doing it, but we should be, as we're doing today, celebrating good practice and impact in order to ensure that this is something that is embedded moving forward. That's it from me, a short presentation. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Llŷr. That's really, really helpful. And, you know, we're just to kind of pick up on a couple of the points in that this was a pilot, as you said, with big ambitions, and we've been piloting the TrACE Toolkit for some time now, way before the, you know, substance misuse sector came on board. And we're always open to reflect and consider what else we can do to best support. So this has been really helpful to engage with additional services to think about that. And it has started to already influence how we operate our community of practice and those task and finish groups that we talked about earlier, to pick up on some of these additional tools, strengthening the guidance, and of course sharing back the practice really of other organisations who've been on the journey to share both their successes, but also, you know, some of the things they might have tested which didn't go as well, which I think is really equally as important. So thank you, that's really, really helpful. The reports have been shared in the chat for a kind of fuller picture and context, and everything to do with the project is in the full report on our website. So please do go there and have a look. But I guess we do have some time for any questions if anybody has any. I haven't kept an eye on the chat if there's anything in there. But if anybody has any questions, comments, please feel free to raise that now whilst we have some time. None? Okay. job well done there, Lee. Everybody's fully informed. So thank you very much. I know you've got to shoot off at some point throughout the afternoon. So just a thank you from us for your patience as well, because it's with any evaluations and getting change management off the ground, it can be a slow start. So you've been really, really supportive of finding ways to engage with us and get that impact kind of monitored. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Nat. I'm
no
going
problem.
to disappear, but if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to respond to them again. I can provide that in writing, Emma. But thank you very much.
No problem. Thanks, Leah. So moving on, slightly ahead of schedule, but our next speaker is Neville Brooks, who's going to share with us his engagement with a bit of a different approach to what we set out to do in terms of with this project, was to work with individual organisations and see who were ready to kind of start this journey with us. And throughout that process and engagement with the expert reference group, which was made up of area planning boards and Welsh Government representatives, there was a massive opportunity to engage with Neville to think about this slightly different, and he's going to share that journey with us now. So over to you, Nev, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thank you, Natalie. And I'm actually off mute as well, so people can hear me from the beginning. It has been a bit of a different journey for us, and I suppose it was a journey that actually started when I first linked in with Emma. We had just actually commissioned the new service, and as part of that sort of tender specification, we'd actually highlighted a need within the new service to actually work towards becoming trauma informed. So I suppose our initial start point was we'd actually set out a contract and a specification, which actually meant that the organization that was coming in was to actually work towards becoming trauma informed and working in a trauma informed way. On top of that, we had really, really good buy-in from Powers Teaching Health Board through Yoreth, who's not with us today, I believe. But what we did was we actually looked at it not just as one single service, but actually as a whole system, sort of recognizing there are lots of projects, both statutory and voluntary, that all interlink, that all sometimes are working with exactly the same client. So we actually looked at it from the perspective of how do we reach out to all those organizations that have a pinch point with an individual who is actually struggling with ACEs, with underlying trauma. And what we initially did was raise awareness through training of what trauma-informed working was all about. And we worked with Emma and we worked with Zaka. And we actually set up 2 training dates for Train the Trainer. And over both training dates, we actually trained about 25 people from a whole number of organizations, from the probation service, from the prison service, from mental health teams, from CAMS teams, from housing teams, substance misuse teams, young persons teams. So they actually learned together and had a chance to actually talk through how they each work as organizations. Once we'd actually completed that first round of training, we moved forward and actually set up a trauma-informed forum, where initially all the individuals who'd actually attended those training come together to actually discuss how it's actually influenced the way they work, but as well as how it's influenced the way they work, what they're actually finding. And I suppose at this early stages of that particular forum, to begin talking about the TrACE Toolkit. Now, the TrACE Toolkit and actually introducing the TrACE Toolkit was always our secondary aim. And we felt that the first thing we needed to do was actually raise awareness in trauma-informed working and actually put it across multiple agencies rather than just launch straight into the TrACE Toolkit within a single organization. So we're now on the journey with the TrACE Toolkit, and our substance misuse provider Kaleidoscope have just completed the TrACE Toolkit. They've actually sent it forward to Emma. They've received their initial feedback on it. And we're now going to start working with them on how we build on that initial audit and how we actually move them towards becoming a lot more trauma informed and within the 6 domains that were mentioned earlier. Now, how we utilize that learning from that point, that Kaleidoscope are outgoing. Kaleidoscope are going to present their learning of the TrACE Toolkit within the Trauma Informed Forum. What that means is their learning on using the TrACE Toolkit will go out across individuals who work for Powys Teaching Health Board, that work for probation, that actually work from the police perspective, that are based in young person services, that work in CAMS. So what we're starting to do is move awareness of the TrACE assessment across multiple agencies across Powys. Again, trying to push the fact that these are individuals that often cross across multiple agencies. So what we really need to do is have a structured, consistent approach to the way we approach each individual engaged within the service. Now, as we move forward, we've just sort of linked in with them again to do a second round of training. Where we've had some other organizations step forward and some other quite key players as well. Things like local authority cabinet members have expressed an interest in trauma-informed working and how other agencies can become more trauma-informed. And as a local authority, how we in turn can become more trauma-informed. But on top of that, we've been doing quite a bit of work with the housing sector within Powys, and especially within homelessness and within complex and multiple needs. Because often within homelessness and with complex and multiple needs, they're the individuals who their first point of contact with any service will be to come through that homeless route. So we're actually looking at expanding the training into multiple departments that sit down through housing, actually introduce more people into the forum, and actually begin that much wider learning of what it looks like within some big organizations. So from my organization, it'll be about moving trauma-informed working into the local authority, whereas from Yori's side of things, he's already begun working with the management group within Powys Teaching Health Board to actually look at introducing it within Powys Teaching Health Board, and with the plans that we as a local authority and Powys Teaching Health Board as a health authority actually move forward, as in some of the plans that Michael's already sort of mentioned in his brief right in the very, very beginning. So for us, where we're at the moment, I feel we've begun raising awareness. Through that raising of awareness, we've now been able to introduce the trauma-informed assessment. The learning that we actually take from the organization that will be the first one to pilot it with us in Powys will go across multiple agencies. And from that learning in turn, it'll go into the 2 biggest organizations within Powys, which is the local authority and the health board, to actually look at how we embed it within the local authority and look to embed it within the health board. And that's been our journey so far, really. It's been a bit of a whistle stop, and it's been a bit of a sort of mad time since coming into post and actually getting a structure and I suppose putting all the moving parts in order. And I think the biggest learning for myself has been around people developing an understanding of what trauma-informed working is prior to us actually introducing the assessment toolkit. And that's about it from me, Nat.
Brilliant.
Short and sweet.
No, that's really a great way to kind of summarize it, I think, in terms of how you outline the different layers. I think to the approach that you've taken, which really goes a long way to kind of supporting the overall ambition of that whole system, you know, not just limited to one organization, but really thinking about how the system interacts with that as well. So really supports the ambition, of course, of the Wales National Trauma Framework, which really sets that ambition of the societal approach. So communicating as those layers really helps us to kind of think about that as well. So as we said at the beginning, a different approach to just working with one organisation and almost like a bigger scale ambition, but something that we're really keen to kind of capture your learning. And I know you're really active and engaged with all of the different groups to share that, and you're really open to sharing that learning with others as well. So thank you from us for that. Any questions for Neville at this point? Seeing any, Nev, so you let off the hook.
Oh, brilliant. I'm more than happy if anyone wants to catch up outside the meeting. Like I said, we're on a journey at the moment as we move things through and as we move through the different layers. I envision the practitioners forum becoming more and more important in actually holding it within sort of organizations' eyesight or within their eye line at all time. Because I think one of the big things that can happen is we all go out, we all do the training, we all do the focus groups, and we all give ourselves a tap on the back, and then we forget about it till we revisit it and find nothing's moved forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. And thank you for that offer of anybody reaching out, because I do think it's a different perspective, and seeing that, as you said at the beginning of the conversations that we were having with the sector, you were just about to, you know, go through a commissioning process, and how, you know, your ways of adapting and thinking about how this could benefit you and your region were really, really positive. So feel free to contact Neville and pick his brains should you wish. But thank you, Neville.
Thank you.
Next up, we're going to hear from, has Naomi joined us? I know it was going to be up against it for timing
yes, she
today.
has. She
Brilliant.
is here. Yes, I can see her.
Excellent. So we have Naomi Oakley join us today to talk about the journey that Adferiad have been on with the TrACE Toolkit. So over to you, Naomi. I can see you now. You're on my screen.
Thanks, Natalie.
No problem.
First of all, I will start with a couple of apologies. My voice is a bit croaky. I flew in this morning from a lovely 2 weeks annual leave in Turkey, so you'll have to bear with me going through the presentation, which again I only put together this morning. And secondly, like Lucy said before about the Frenchie making a noise, I will apologise in advance if my dog decides to make a debut on the screen, so please bear with me.
No problem.
I'll just share my screen for you now.
Thanks for joining. As I said, I know we was pushing it fine, and you travelling back, so we're really, really appreciative of you joining us.
No problem at all. Can everyone see the screen? Is that okay?
Yeah.
Great.
Okay, so my name's Naomi Oakley. I'm the Director of North Operations for Adferiad Recovery. And I'm just going to go through our journey so far of the implementation of the TrACE Toolkit. So we started off by looking at the 6 areas within the toolkit, and we gave consideration of what we do already, or what we think we do already. More importantly, how do we evidence what we do, and then what we need to improve on. So we started off by putting the 6 areas together from the toolkit, making a internal action plan with all of the areas, looked at what, got a group together, looked at what we did already, and then the question of, okay, that's great, we do it, how do you evidence that? Now, that was a bit of a sticking point actually, because you do a lot of this in your everyday work, but you don't necessarily have a document or something that can evidence what we do. So that's something that myself and Emma have been working with over the past couple of months, really, isn't it, Emma? And there has been some difficulties with sharing different bits, but I think we're getting there, and we are working on that. So first of all, we'll have a look at the governance and leadership area of the toolkit. So we looked at our board of trustees and our executive team, and we realised early on that a lot of individuals are actually qualified to senior levels of practice, which includes psychologists, counsellors, RMNs, RGNs, GPs, and of course those with lived experience. So we felt within the executive team and within the board of trustees that we had a lot of professionals there that could help us on this journey. We also then looked at all staff, and I say all staff, volunteers, including trustees that come on board at Adferiad, to make sure that very early in the induction, we implemented the ACE awareness training as part of that induction. And then we offered the trauma-informed practices training as they go through within the organisation. And that was kind of key in the beginning as a start-off role to make sure that everyone had that level of understanding of what we were trying to do, and also embed it within the toolkit of what and the framework. We then looked at the TrACE Implementation Committee, and it's something that I was quite passionate about, so I agreed to lead on it for the organisation, along with my colleague, Professor Ewan Hales, who's got an awful lot of experience within this area. So we thought two key individuals would be there to push it. We had commitments very early on from our exec team and the trustees to resource the implementation of the TrACE practices, and we also work extremely closely with the APBs and various other organisations, and I know Catherine's online today from the APB, to make sure that TrACE is part of our agendas, such as our co-occurring groups, our alcohol strategy groups, CYP agendas, and various other boards. So it wasn't just governance and leadership from internal at Veriad, it was also looking at that governance and leadership within other organisations. And I have to say the APB in North Wales have been fantastic with this. The second area obviously to consider was the policies and procedures. This is an area that we're still improving on, and it's one that I know that many organisations have had discussions about. The main reason for this is, as large organisations, as you can imagine, we have so many policies and procedures. To be able to go in and change all of those is going to take time to make sure that the trauma-informed practices and approaches are embedded within them. However, there is a commitment from Veriad within our policy committee that when we're reviewing policies during our cyclical process, we will then start adding trauma-informed practices. And again, we thought it was great if Professor Ewan Hales could be the lead on that policy committee, as he's got the expertise in being able to add things where we need it. We're also working with the ASUB and other providers to potentially consider template policies. And going forward, this will be something that would be so helpful to all of us. So we're not starting afresh. So we can, and it's consistent. The policies will be consistent within the organisations. So we think template policies would be a fantastic approach going forward. You'll have to excuse me, too much karaoke singing in Turkey. Okay, so the next area from workforce training and support, as I mentioned, all staff and volunteers on induction complete ACEs training. We also then engage all staff in our Veriad Academy of Training, and that's various training courses, all the way from low-level training, IASCO courses, all the way up to, we offer various things such as MBAs, if that's something people want to specialise in. We've got various specialist staff, and we offer specialist training, as mentioned just, for all levels of TrACE, including from trauma aware all the way through to trauma specialists. And again, if one of our counsellors came to us and put forward that they would like to specialise in trauma-informed practices, it's something that our organisation would consider going forward and look at how we could do that. So again, this is part of the commitment from our exec team and our trustees, as I mentioned before. Veriad are also commissioned by the APB to deliver the workforce training developments across North Wales, and there's been a lot of work done with Helen Jones from the APB around the ACEs training and the trauma-informed practices that are offered to all professionals to make sure that the training's quality, it's up to date, and that we keep updated with any new areas of practice that need to be embedded. Most organisations, just like ours, we have regular support and supervision for all staff working on the ground, and staff throughout, all the way up to, again, the exec team. And we've recently began offering reflective practice techniques, which is utilised across staff teams. That can be formal or informal, and it can be done one-to-one or in group sessions. And again, we're finding that this is something that the staff are welcoming, because a lot of the time we consider the service users from a trauma practice, but we need to consider what the staff are seeing every day, what the staff are dealing with every day. And as we know, there's a lot more complex issues coming with our client cohort, so it's important that we look after our staff. We've always had an open door policy for regular debrief sessions, and again, that's all the way from team leaders, managers, directors, and even to the trustees if needed. So that's something that we find useful within our staff team. A great area for support has been our in-house Cadwyn staff support service, which is used a lot by staff, and this can be anything from personal issues that they're facing, but also stuff that they're seeing within work. Now, this can be anything from low-level support, talking therapies, all the way up to counselling if it's deemed necessary for staff. and it's something that's been very welcomed across the staff team. It's been in place for a couple of years and is utilised quite a lot. So I would recommend an area of support for staff if you're able to as organisations, because it's helping staff come forward with things that they're seeing, come forward with being able to deal with different issues, and helping that lines of communication really within our team to become more close, and people are feeling that they're able to come forward and say what they're facing, be that personal, as I say, or within work. The next area, and this is quite an area actually that I found quite interesting for myself, was the physical environments and service design and delivery. Now, many years service design and delivery, we've had that co-production. All of us have co-production with our service users, or I hope we do, and we ask them what services should look like, how we should design them from that beginning planning stage all the way through to delivery. Physical environments was one that actually took me back a bit within this journey, because when you first look at the TrACE Toolkit, you think, right, physical environments, we've got to make it trauma informed, we've got to make it all welcome and everything. So we started off with consultation from staff, service users around decor furnishings, and when we're doing our cycle renewing of any buildings, we have that in place anyway and ask what would make them feel more comfortable. And you'll get a different answer from the CYP, service users, of course, to what you will from someone who's an adult service user. So trying to find that balance is quite difficult, but also it's quite enjoyable at the same time, because the innovation that comes from different people is great. This was also an area where we needed to start to consider, and initially the TrACE Toolkit was quite hard on this, was around cultural competencies. Now, for me, this came down also from just having the offer of staff fridges in the building, such as halal, vegan, vegetarian, quiet rooms being in place for people. It can be quite traumatic for individuals who've got personal characteristics that we've got to protect if they haven't got a quiet space where they need to go and pray. Now, not just from not from something where they've been traumatized, but being able to open up lines of communication where they may not feel comfortable in doing so, we found that was quite hard. So the considerations of cultural competencies is really important when you're trying to embed the TrACE Toolkit. And I mentioned this in the presentation I did previously with Emma, and it's something that is coming up more and more as we're going through the toolkit itself. We also did a workshop with various service users around various aspects of TrACE. And especially we focused quite a bit on that re-traumatisation, especially within buildings. So, for example, we had different cohort service users in from different services that we deliver, and we asked around the reception entry systems. Now, those that had been caught up in the criminal justice system actually found it quite traumatic that the entry systems in reception were locked. So that could be something from COVID, where you come to the reception, you press the buzzer, you ask to come in. And then when they come in, the door's locked behind them. They found that quite scary actually, because they felt like they couldn't get back out when they needed, and it brought back memories of them being in prison. However, then on the back end of that was someone who's been through domestic violence, for example. They found it actually quite safe and secure that when they walked into that building, that door was locked and people had to ask for entry. So again, trying to find that happy medium between your areas, especially if you've got multi-agency buildings that are delivering different services, that was a consideration that we have to consider for all. And it was quite interesting when the service users came together, actually, because those with the offending behaviour were quite, yeah, we don't like it, it's prison. And then those with domestic abuse, they chimed up and said, well, actually, hang on a minute, you need to consider it from our point. And what we found was service users then looking back and going, well, actually, yeah, I see it from your point now. Do you know what? We can probably handle the doors being locked behind us if it makes you feel more comfortable. So it kind of brought the service users together, which was really nice to see. Yes, I do talk a bit, guys, so if I'm going over time, just tell me. Okay, so the next one, the monitoring and evaluation. We have our own research group that keeps us up to date with trauma-informed practices, various treatment options and approaches to ensure that they remain compliant, up to date and deliver service quality. We have our own research officer, Chloe, who is all about research, and she's fantastic, tells us something if something new's on the horizon, and make sure she keeps us on track for anything new that's coming. We have strength-based assessments approaches in place. We've implemented a whole person, whole service approach data system internally. It's embedded so that individuals only need to tell their story once and then can cross-refer to the varied services that they need to. Again, this is something that we hope in the future we'll be able to do this for all services, regardless of where we're referring on to, outside agencies as well. That'd be great. And we've also got very much a willingness to learn and share good practices, both in-house and with the partnership agencies. And for me, that's going to be key to making sure we get this right. Learning from each other, sharing what's good, sharing what hasn't worked, and making sure we've got that network for all of us across Wales to make us trauma-informed champions. Okay, so some of the considerations I've mentioned briefly was around the cultural competencies and the protected characteristics, and also the policy templates. A very big consideration for our organisation is that not all service users have been affected by trauma. Now, this can be, especially for those with mental health, not all mental health conditions have happened as a result of trauma. And we need to remember that as an organisation when you're implementing your trauma-informed approaches, because we are training staff, we are making trauma-informed practice the forefront of everything. But we need to remember that there isn't people that have been affected by trauma, that have got conditions such as mental health, such as some people who've been through homelessness services. And we need to make sure we find that happy medium instead of just going trauma-informed, trauma-informed, trauma-informed. We need to make sure we've got that consideration. And for us, that's been it's not difficult, but it is making sure you find a balance within that. Especially when it comes to your assessments. Of course, we want one assessment for all. We want one assessment that works for a whole organisation, but we've got to make sure we've got that balance right. As I mentioned with the forum that we held with service users, it'd be great to see a peer-led network for TrACE support and approaches. The amount of support that can come from peers, as we already know within substance misuse, as we know from employment, housing, so many areas, a peer-led network would be absolutely fantastic. Now, this could be an online network, it could be any sort of network that we say, but if we could get a Wales-wide network, that would be great, and it's something that service users for sure are championing. And also a commissioning of Wales-wide approach to training. Now, we know everyone's delivering training. We know agencies are buying more into the training. We need to make sure that's it's considered across all, that we're getting the same training where it's needed, instead of having different pockets. We need to make sure it's quality training. We need to make sure that it's relevant, it's up to date, and that it's being monitored and standard the way it should be, to make sure that we're all getting the best out of it. And so a consideration would be that of a commission of a Wales-wide approach to training to both professionals and also to potentially service users that can champion our goal going forward with TrACE approaches. Okay, so that's me. So feel free, anyone, to ask me any questions, or equally tell me to be quiet. I'm happy with that as well. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thank you, Naomi. Thank you so much for that. That was really, really comprehensive. And before I open the floor to questions, just wanted your last point there around a Wales-wide commissioning activity of training. Your points you made are absolutely key to this, and something that we are strongly committed to within the implementation of the Wales trauma framework. We know, as you said, there's so many different training providers out there, some which are free, some which come with a cost. And part of that work, we are currently kind of looking at the landscape of training out there, not just around trauma informed, but how they then relate to the 4 practice levels. And part of the evolution of that kind of work, if you like, will be to have some standardized commitment to certain consistencies then, which really embed the trauma framework principles at the heart of it. So a point well made, and just to rest assured, that is one of our top priorities for the implementation of that. Just to kind of pick up as well, really thankful for you really pushing the point around workforce support. I think we all think about workforce training and forget about the support to implement those new skills, but equally to understand the impact of such work on staff, but also the staff are human and have their own experiences as well. So that's where the importance, I guess, of that support, but also and equally the policies which you outlined is the complex beast of a domain that any organisation has to tackle. So thank you so much. That was really, you obviously really bought into it as an organisation and have considered this really in depth alongside other work that you did. But also just a point to make that we know that trauma-informed practice isn't new. It isn't a new new concept. People are working like this across Wales already and beyond. But what the framework is helping us to do is push forward with that consistency, isn't it? And making sure that at that organisational level that it's considered. So thank you very much. Any questions for Naomi at this point?
Just to pick up there, Natalie, around the support, one key area is quite often we only think of the incident that's happened with staff. So, for example, a death of the service user. Now, we think of that initial response where the death of the service user has come. Where we don't pay particular attention is what comes after. Now, what I mean by that is there could be staff are being asked to go to coroner's inquests. It could be the paperwork that they're having to do. It could be anything like that. And that can be a real scary area for staff, especially those that are quite low level and don't potentially see that. And that's what we're finding a lot more, especially within substance misuse. There are a lot more deaths. We know that. We look at the fatal drugs poisoning. Now, not just dealing with that initial trauma of losing someone, but also what comes after that. And we need to get the balance right there to make sure that staff are supported at all levels, because what we will end up doing is losing good staff because they don't feel supported enough for the after effects of what's happened. So for me, I think that's an area that we need to look at as well, is making sure staff are supported through that whole process. So I just wanted to just
no, and I think it's a very point well made, because I think we also need to think about how the system doesn't help with that. You know, when you think about the processes of serious case reviews, domestic homicide reviews, the panic sometimes that sets in, have I done everything I can? You know, an organisational culture towards that reflective process is 100%. Really key to staff feeling supported through that and not feeling alone or to blame through any of that. So 100%. Very well point made. So thank you ever so much. I don't see any hands up with any questions, so hopefully people are stockpiling the questions for the end. Next in the agenda is to welcome our very own Emma Howells, who's been leading on this work with us, or for us, I should say, in the ACE Hub. And I think when you read the report, this comes through how valuable Emma's expertise and support within the sector has been and critical to this project. So big thank you from the ACE Hub for that. Em, I think I'm going to hand over to you just to kind of talk through next steps and a bit about the project. Is that okay?
That's absolutely fine. And thank you, Natalie, for that introduction. So yeah, for those of you that don't know me, so my name is Emma and I'm the Substance Misuse Sector Lead at the ACE Hub Wales. I've been at the Hub for the past 14 months, initially on a 12-month secondment from Barod, and you heard my colleague Rachel Wilson speak at the start of this webinar. And that secondment has been extended now for a further 24 months. So initially that 12 months, the work has kind of been really influential and developed really well, but we've got another 2 years to kind of keep that work going, which is really, really lovely to hear. The work has really gained momentum over the course of the pilot, and with the trauma framework now at that implementation phase, interest continues to grow. It's been as much a journey for myself as, having worked in the substance misuse sector for over 20 years, I thought I understood exactly what trauma-informed meant, but soon realised that this means so many different things to individuals, services and organisations. And I guess having that trauma framework that provides that consistent language is really important for us to consider when we're talking about trauma-informed practice. It's been a fantastic opportunity, which I'm grateful to both Barod for agreeing to the secondment and to the ACE Hub Wales for supporting me in this role. The focus for the past year was very much about engaging with the sector and working with the willing. It's been very interesting seeing how each organisation, service or local authority has approached the work, and just demonstrates the flexibility of the TrACE Toolkit and how it can be applied to meet the needs of any organisation. And I think we've heard from 3 very different approaches today. You'll kind of agree from Powis's journey right through from Barod, and then kind of just hearing from Naomi and Adferiad's journey. So all very different ways on how they've implemented the TrACE Toolkit, but it works for that organisation, and that's fine. Not one size fits all. And I think that's the beauty of the TrACE Toolkit and how it can be used as a roadmap also almost to guide organisations through that journey. We will continue to engage with the substance misuse sector, extending that reach to other key stakeholders, such as our colleagues in the NHS that provide substance misuse services across Wales. So for the next part of the presentation, I'm going to pick up on some of the key recommendations that Claire alluded to in his presentation from the evaluators, and just look at where we're kind of going to be focusing our next 12 months of work, really, the next steps for some of those key recommendations. So Nat touched on forums like the Substance Misuse Expert Reference Group and the TrACE Community of Practice, and these have been great ways to connect with colleagues from Welsh Government, commissioners and different sectors to really share that learning and showcase the work that's happening across Wales. The support and commitment that's been demonstrated over the past 12 months has been so positive and continues to evolve. So one of the recommendations from the report is, how do we now begin to involve service providers in this process, with the aim of that cross-sectoral interaction between the expert reference group and those that provide these vital services. The aim for these 2 groups will be to highlight current themes and to collectively share ideas and best practice, and to collaboratively work on providing solutions. Again, we'll be looking to draw on the expertise within the expert reference group in how we shape that recommendation moving forward. But it's very much pivotal that we want to be looking at those that lead on services, those service providers, to engage those in this conversation as well. So Naomi just touched on the training, and we're very, very keen to kind of make sure that the training is up to date, fit for purpose and well coordinated. The Substance Misuse Expert Reference Group, I think Nat mentioned this at the start of the presentation, originally came together in 2020 to create a bespoke training resource for the sector. This was rolled out as a train the trainer model, and we have been able to continue with that rollout over the past 12 months. The plan is to continue to do this in a coordinated way and support the development of a training network, again to share and pool resources and to ensure that this is sustained across the sector and beyond the life of this project. And I think what Nev touched on, when we train those 25 different professionals across Powys, what's been really, really lovely to see as an outcome from that training is that they've buddied up. So what we have is the Kaleidoscope service buddying up with the probation service to deliver that training. So not only pooling resources and cutting down the need for 2 staff to go and deliver training, but also kind of having that mixed shared experience from different service perspectives as well, to kind of make sure that training is sustained and it's worked really well. And I think that's a really good example of best practice where it's kind of happened. We plan to carry out a review of the existing training package along with our e-learning resource. And again, this will be a collaborative piece of work aiming to engage with colleagues from the sector, including Traumatic Stress Wales. The learning resource that we currently deliver sits at that trauma-aware practice level, as outlined in the trauma framework, and we plan to explore co-producing a second training resource that sits at that more trauma-skilled practice level. Again, you know, this would be available across Wales, and to kind of echo what Naomi said, providing that consistency so that we're all kind of accessing that same message, that same consistent language, with that kind of same ideology, which is really key. When organisations have started to engage around the TrACE Toolkit, a common theme, and again something that was picked up as one of the recommendations, is how will they know if they're trauma informed? How will that service be able to kind of recognise that it's kind of hit that benchmark? And again, you know, this is something that's detailed and documented quite well in the report as well. So if you need kind of further information on that, please have a look at it through the report. But what I will say with regards to kind of success indicators, the further education sector have been doing an extensive piece of work around success indicators, and following a series of roadshows held across Wales, led by Zachary Hussain, my colleague at the ACE Hub, along with Paperboat, an external consultant team, they're now in the process of collating the information gleaned from these 4 events with a view of creating a universal guidance document that will support organisations to shape success indicators. And this will be a universal resource. So even though it was created with the FE sector, it's going to be universal, that can kind of be applied to whatever sector kind of needs to develop these success indicators. Again, this is something that we plan to focus on, drawing on the support from the expert reference group and working with service providers in the substance misuse field to tease out what these may look like for the substance misuse sector. So lots of work to do, but, you know, we must realise that we're doing a lot of work. And I think when people go through the TrACE Toolkit self-assessment, there's a lot of best practice that they can example and evidence. So it's not like they have to start from scratch, because it's almost like celebrating the success. This isn't about a deficit approach, it's about a strengths-based approach and about building on the good work that already happens, that we know that happens, but it's making it consistent across organisations and not just kind of siloed into different services within an organisation. So another recommendation from the report is to refine the TrACE Toolkit resource. And again, this was something that kind of Llŷr mentioned early on, and it's something that is happening. And in response to Naomi's suggestion about template policies, a task and finish group very much kind of came from further education and higher education around creating a policy guidance document, and this kind of really shines a light on, you know, what to look out for when you're looking through policies with that trauma-informed lens, and will be a huge asset, I think, to organisations and services that are looking through their policies and how to kind of steer that work moving forward. But another feature that we're kind of looking at as well through the TrACE community of practice is what other resources are going to lend itself to that TrACE toolkit. And from the TrACE community of practice, we've been able to form 2 task and finish groups. The first group is looking at co-producing a guidance document around how to create a TrACE statement of commitment or a pledge, because we've kind of really struggled with perhaps the statement of commitment, and the group has been talking about maybe we need to call it more of a pledge than a statement of commitment. So it's very much in that kind of embryonic stage. And then the second task and finish group we've got is looking at trauma-informed physical environment and what they may look like for organisations. So this group, with regards to that physical environment, is planning to create a visual resource along with a guidance document to support. So both task and finish groups will be instrumental in co-producing resources that will aid with embedding trauma-informed practice. These themes were collectively chosen at the TrACE community of practice and will support the TrACE toolkit and its implementation. The resources have been highlighted and again will form that ongoing development within the TrACE toolkit. I don't think we'll ever get to that kind of finish point. It will kind of always be evolving, and there'll always be learning that will come from that. So these were just a few of the key recommendations detailed in the report and will be the focus of the work for the next 12 months. But to be reassured that all the recommendations from the evaluation report will be taken to the expert reference group, discussed and actioned through this platform. I would just like to take this opportunity to thank all those people that have been on this journey with me so far. It's been an absolute pleasure to engage with so many great people with such passion and vision. I just want to acknowledge that it is an extensive piece of work to embed the TrACE toolkit, and it requires a lot of dedication and commitment. And I think just from those that have presented today, the enthusiasm that's been demonstrated through this webinar alone will hopefully inspire those that are on the sideline to join us in becoming a trauma-informed Wales. And I think, you know, it's really exciting to be part of that journey. I just want to thank the ACE Hub and all those organisations that have been with us along the way, and just watch this space, I guess, for the next 2 years of our journey. So thank you, and that's it from me.
Oh, thank you, Emma. That was a lovely way to round up our kind of forward look, I guess, in terms of how we move forward, because this was the first piece of the puzzle of getting this work started within the sector. And it's really important that we do consider those recommendations and how we build our work and efforts around addressing some of those, well, all of those recommendations, be it, you know, in different forums, I guess. But I can't stress enough that the work and commitment and drive through the TrACE National Community of Practice is really inspirational. So if anybody does have heard things today that you'd like to get involved with, and certainly within a co-productive space with these tools, please do get in touch. We'll pop Lauren, could I ask if you drop Zarka's email into the chat, please? She's our lead for the contacts for that, and you can be invited on to the next meeting. But I just wanted to pick up on some that you raised them around the trainer and the model and the approach to that. Do is very much around sustainability and how this approach is sustained in organizations beyond our involvement, you know, in terms of we are fortunate to have commitment and support to look at this for specific sectors in this depth, but ultimately it is about how we equip and work with those organizations to help them sustain and embed consistently across the sector. So yeah, lots of work to do, as you said, but really exciting nonetheless. So thank you very much for that. We do have a space now for any questions. I know I've offered throughout the presentation this morning, but if there is anybody who has any questions, I want to raise that now. But equally, as I said at the start of the call, please feel free to put in the chat or reach out individually to any of us via email. But we do have some minutes to spare, unless all of you want to use the time to go and grab a cuppa, and we can give you the gift of time. But equally, this is a space of sharing, so please do come forward if you do have any questions for any of us on the call today. Lydia.
Hi, there was only one thing that I think I put in the chat, but I wasn't sure.
Okay.
Just when Naomi was just saying about trauma, I was just wondered, just listening to the presentation, whether we're really aware of pre and perinatal trauma. Only reason being, because I realise the people I support, and I work for a housing association, but what's happening is the people I support, quite a lot of them don't know they've got trauma, but when they've actually done training on pre and perinatal trauma and attachment trauma, they realise that really fits with what's happening to them. Do you know what I mean? So I just realised the education around things like that is really key. And I think for a lot of those people, it's really helped them to understand why they've been stuck for so long. So I just wanted to sort of put that in the pot, really. That's all.
Yeah, no, and I think that's really interesting, isn't it, in terms of how an organisation can provide that education and awareness, but also that kind of cultural acceptance, I guess, isn't it, within an organisation that these things happen to people, be it our staff or our service users or service beneficiaries, and there are ways and means of supporting people around those experiences. Because I think what we're really clear with the trauma framework commitment is we won't always know about everybody's trauma and their experiences, but the culture and the environments that we promote will mean that they feel better supported with those principles at hand. But I think you work closely with Traumatic Stress Wales as well, Lydia, don't you, in terms of they've got a specific subgroup around perinatal trauma, I believe.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's quite up and running yet, but
okay.
Yeah. But I think it's just being aware of that training. I don't know what training people are doing, you see, so I don't know if any pre-perinatal training is in the pot for staff, so they can see, because it's not really, the training is the same as like New Pathways do, and the people who work with people who've had sexual abuse, the training is actually the same. Do you know what I mean? So it's training that can be used, but just with that different lens on it, really.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Lydia.
Okay.
Any other comments, questions, queries for us? No. Stunned you all into silence. Okay, so we'll wrap it up then, in terms of just reminding you that the links to the full reports are in the chat, along with any contact details if you want to find out more. And just to thank you, really, having such interest in this work is a testament to the sector's you know, commitment to trauma-informed practice being embedded. So thank you very much. And hopefully speak to you soon if anybody else is interested. And you are all may leave if you wish, or we'll be on the call if anybody wants to stick around as well to have a chat about anything.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Bye.
Cheers, folks.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Are you able to stop the recording, Em, or is that Lauren?
I think I can do it. Yeah.